play the route.
The shir should be a full shlema for my brother-in-law's father, Shlema Tevla ben Sarah. Shafur shlema b'karav.
Obeyed.
Today, Emir Hashem.
Could the Rav repeat the name and Rav Pesach?
Shlema Tevla, Tebli.
How do you spell that? How do you spell
Tes
the
Beis Lamed Yud.
Tev, like Rav Tevel.
Tevli ben Sarah in critical condition and after for shlema. Today, Emir Hashem, we're going to discuss a topic that there's, like Chazal say, Ein ben David ba ad sheyichala neshamas shebaguf. Until all the neshamas come out. All the neshamas come out doesn't just mean the people come out and all the gilgulim come out. It means also that we got to have food for all of these people. So the manufacturers of today have gone out of their way in order to go and make sure that Mashiach comes, b'korov mamish, and make every possible imaginable food, bring back foods of a mole, bring back foods from the time of the Gemara. And today, Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to discuss once and for all, what is the psak of a wrap. You make a mezainis, you make a moitzi, make a, maybe make a mashana brias. Once and for all, what's the bracha on a wrap for those on American soil that don't understand from the taivas of a wrap? I managed to make sure that we brought in today wraps. Rebbitzin.
Ooh.
Lift up the wraps.
I'll leave it now.
Would you mind taking away the Seder plate a moment? Take that one moment. This is a wrap. It looks so innocent. It actually looks like a matzah before it's baked, as a matter of fact. I think you'll all agree. Or for those that have experience, it looks really somewhat like a Svardi matzah, except they might be a little bit darker than this, but not the Svardim. I meant the matzah. But these things are of the greatest shaila of the door, Kimat. And today we're going to try and figure out what is the bracha of this. In the meantime, you go and eat it. But until after the shir, take a piece of bread and pater yourself with a moitzi, because then by the end of the shir, maybe we'll know finally what to do. Kallus.
Okay. That was manufactured in the kitchen of the Kallus family, or that's a commercial?
Oh, those are real live bought wraps.
Okay.
They were not made by the Kalluses, not yet, but who knows what could be after the end of this year. And this is a very, very serious shaila, because when you deal with some shailas, you could just say, listen, be machmir. What's the machmir? What's the kula? If you're supposed to make on it hamoitzi and you make a mezainis, so then you lost out on the bracha of a moitzi. You didn't wash netilas yadayim. You didn't say 4 brachos, because amazin, 4 brachos, deraisas. Very serious shaila. Ve'oid, does it pater the food? Am I having a wrap? Most people are not having a wrap by itself.
This should be a juicy one.
Am I patering? Do I pater the food with the wrap? If you're supposed to make a moitzi, it paters the food. If you're supposed to make a mezainis, it doesn't pater the food. And then more shailas, is there a certain amount of a wrap that I eat that it turns into a meal? So there's no machmir and there's no kula, and we have to really once and for all. And we also don't have a lot of guidance on this shaila. In the Darius HaKoidnim, these shailas were shown to Rav Moshe, to Shlomo Zalman. We'll see there is maybe a remez of something that was discussed by Rav Yashiv of this shaila. But certainly we're going to have to read the sugya and learn up over here and try to figure out on our own what's the bracha of a wrap. Mezainis, moitzi, birchas hamazon, v'chulei. And the truth is, we can maybe just go straight to the package. And if you look in the package, the one that's in my kitchen, it says on it, don't worry, no need for a shear. It says on it, Bayrei Minei Mezainis. So now you know, very good. The package says on it, Bayrei Minei Mezainis. Now, it could be they're referring to the plastic bag, because same packaging comes up on a mezainis roll, which in Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to learn one day in the sugya over here, probably more by Daf Mem Beis. And you're going to see that the only thing that could be mezainis about the packaging, about the mezainis roll, is perhaps the plastic bag that it comes in. And even that's probably not true. So we're left with a lot of confusion. And as a matter of fact, I just saw that one of the plastic wrap covers I have depends on the hechsher. One was Landau, one was Ada, one of them is a moitzi, and one of them is a mezainis. So now we really don't know what to do. I can call up Rabbi Landau and ask him to come in. We can call up Rabbi Badatz and ask them to come in. But unfortunately for all of you, you're stuck with me. So let's go together with the sugya and see what's the sugya. Now, the emes is at the end, we're going to try once and for all to try to retoch Sarisa de Nahama and try to once and for all make some, all these sifim, Sif Yud, all the way through Tazayin, seemed like perhaps person would have thought before and didn't think it was so negeya. He knows Kuf Samaches is about Pasab Abakisnin, and he thinks that's what's negeya. And then he saw our sugyas of the most negeya shilas of all of HILCHOS brachos. This shilah, Mitzvah Shem, it'll also take us into the shilah of puff pastry, of wafers, the little, in Eretz Yisrael, they're called the vafalim. And what's the bracha of all these things? What's the bracha if you have these things in a meal? Again, last week, we were zeichet to see, and 2 weeks ago actually, that when you have something which starts out a belila ava, it starts out a thick batter, a thick dough. That's a very, very serious prerequisite for being a maitzi. Ad Kadei Kach Rabbeinu Tam said, once you start with a thick batter, a belila ava, even if you cook it afterward, you did not lose the shem maitzi, you didn't lose the shem challah, etc. That was the big fight, the world war. And that's a shaila that here Shemayim is machmir on. We have to see how exactly our wraps are made and what exactly they are based on those shaila. But that's one issue that we have to deal with. The result of this wrap, as you saw, is this flimsy thing that can flap around. Is that Sarisa de Nahama? Is it not Sarisa de Nahama? Perhaps. We know when you talk about lakshan, I don't mean when you're talking lakshan. I mean when you talk about lakshan, it starts out also a belila ava. And since it starts out a belila ava, we would think, hey, it's a maitzi. But there even Rabbeinu Tam agrees, we saw, because since what are you left with after you finish making your lasagna, you finish with your noodles, you're left with some flimsy thing. So perhaps we can say flimsy doesn't have Sarisa de Nahama, which Memela would make our day much easier. We'll say, look, you have a blila ava, but you're left with flimsy. If you start out with a blila ava and you're left with flimsy, so then that's something that everyone agrees doesn't have a Sarisa de Nahama. So what exactly is the shaila over here is really very, very based on our sugya Shulchan Aruch over here. Says all these interesting types of words. The Aruch HaShulchan already speaks out. We don't have a clarity in what these things are. Says the Shulchan Aruch, trun truknin. The hainu, you make this flour and water, you put it into a ditch, and it seems to get baked over there in this ditch. You make on it a mezainis, and you make on it an alamechia. Excuse me. However, if you kaveh sud on it, you make on an amaitzi. So what's this?
Put up the Shulchan Aruch, please. Put up Tezvav. Thank you.
Sounds like some form of excuse me. It sounds like some form of a pasab abakisnin. We know those are the rules of pasab abakisnin. Something that if you eat a small amount, you don't only make a mezainis, but if you eat a large amount, you're going to make an alamechia, a berchzamaitzi, and a berchzamazin. So what's this thing? Then the Shulchan Aruch says a comparison, but trisa, which seems to pour, that seems to be the difference between these two things. The first one seems to be that it didn't pour. This one seems to be it pours, and then it spreads out. This one, says Shulchan Aruch, under no circumstances will you ever make a birchas hamazon on this. This thing has no tzarisa de nahama. Now, what exactly is this trukanin, and what exactly is this trisa? Because once we would know this, perhaps it would have a lot to do with our sugya over here. We'd be able to figure out what's the din by us. Very interesting, not so known. You know, there's a very big shaila by pasab abakisnin. Everyone knows already the basics by pasab abakisnin. There's a tzad that pasab abakisnin is the what we call like pretzels and crackers, things that are things that are hard to eat because they are hard and kosher, like pretzels and crackers, etc. There's one mandamer that says if it's a dough which is filled with, you know, all types of zachin, apples, who knows what, that's a pasab like a hamantashin, that's a pasab. Others say what's pasab abakisnin? Positive kisnin is when the dough itself was kneaded with some type of fruit juices. All these things are sfeikis because they're machlekes in the Rishonim. But what if I would have something, and we make a mezainis and an al michya unless you have the right amount of any of those three. What if I would have something that it doesn't have any of the qualifications? It's not hard, it's not filled, it doesn't have a dough which is kneaded with fruit juices, but it's clearly not something you're kaveh suda on. For example, the basic idea of Isai is what makes something into bread. So let's see, flour and water makes into bread. So the answer is the pretzel's not any more than flour and water and yeast and avapika, and it's a mezainis. So you'll say, oh, okay, so I guess flour and water that has eggs or something like that, then for sure that's not going to be a hamoitzi. Why not? Don't you have Kallus, egg Kallus on Shabbos? So what is it? Elamai, you're going to tell me flour, water that I eat at a meal. I don't know, flour and water you eat at a meal is called lasagna, it's called pasta, and you can eat 30 bowls, and when you get out of the hospital, you make an al michya. So what's the basic rule? The basic rule is that if you have flour and water that you make into a baked product, which is a product that you convey your suit on, it's your meal, it's something that is gonna, like in the times of Chazal, when they were kaveh sud on it, it's simply because that was the ikr, bread was the ikr. But even by us, bread is still the ikr. You start a meal with bread, it fills you up first. So therefore, if you have flour and water, and it's a flour and water that you eat as a part of the satiating process, so therefore the brachos hamaitzi. That's why Chazal came along with shainim, machlekesim, and said, look, something like a pretzel, it's not something you eat as a main, you eat as a snack. If you'll have enough of it, and in economy, if you'll have enough of it, then in economy it'll turn into a hamaitzi. Chazal said a cake, too much juices and who knows what in there, so you can't eat it as a meal. And economy, if you have enough of it, yeah. Same thing with a hamantash, etc. What if I have a food though, which is flour, water, baked, isn't filled, isn't kneaded with something lush, with fruit juices, and it's not even a cracker type of food? So would I make on it a maitzi? So on the one hand, it doesn't have the qualifications of the Shulchan Aruch. On the other hand, Shulchan Aruch wasn't maybe exeris akasiv. Shulchan Aruch was just saying, these are examples of things that you're not kaveh sud on. Going back to my youth, the one thing that comes to mind when you think about this is probably a hot pretzel, a soft hot pretzel, which a soft hot pretzel is something that nobody has as a meal. It's a total snack. My understanding is in England, there's something where my wife is from, there's something called a bridge roll. And my understanding is that a bridge roll is the same idea. It's something you'll actually have bread, it's bridge roll. It's something that's actually made smaller and different looking. It basically tastes like bread. So on the other hand, it doesn't have the qualifications, but nobody ever eats bridge rolls as a meal. You'll have it as a snack with your tea and crumpets. Or for all I know, a bridge roll is a crumpet. I don't know what a crumpet is. But so what's the din? So it's very interesting. Our Shulchan Aruch seems to be a makor to this idea, because over here we're dealing with a trunkenin. This thing is a pasaba bekisnin. Comes to Shleim Zalman Orbach in the Shmira Shabbos HILCHOS. It's actually in Peregrine Dalit, HaRav Kuf Lamed Aleph. And he says, this thing, he talks about if you would have it on Pesach, and could you be Yotzei the mitzvah and whatnot. And he says, look, this thing over here is something that people ate as a snack. It's flour, water, and all you did was eat it as a snack. And therefore, he says, it's going to be a mitzvah and an al michya. If you eat enough of it, it'll turn into a berachos hamazon. But here we found a very interesting thing. We found something that you eat a bread kimat type product as a snack. And you see that it's not exeris akasiv, filled dough and kneaded dough with liquids of, fruit juices. crackery things, etc. You see, anything which is flour and water, but it's clear to the Welt that this is not something that people are kaveh suda on. It's something that you might eat a lot of it, and then in chanami, but it's not the norm how people view that thing. It's not like bread. It's not like a bagel, etc. It's not like a pita. So then the bracha on it is a mezainis. And Shlomo Zalman says that trunkenin is mamish k'may lechem. Those are the words in the Shmir Shabbos. He says it's mamish k'may lechem. He says, Elamai, it's a lechem that you're not kaveh suda on it. And therefore, he says, an unbelievable thing. Aval Pesach, he says, Pesach is different. He says, Pesach, if a person were to have trunkenin, I don't know what this thing looked like, but he says, if you would have trunkenin on Pesach, he said that would then, the chashivas of that, because that became the bread on Pesach, that would turn it into a hamoitzi. He brings a raya. He says, "Hare the Svardim the rest of the year on matzah don't make a hamaitzi; they make a mezainis. Kum Pesach on matzah they make a maitzi. What's the pshat? Because that's the bread of Pesach. Now that gufa is something that we have to understand. What's the pshat that Svardim don't make a hamaitzi on matzah? So the answer is very simple. That's not a kasha. The kasha is on us. The Ashkenazim. Why is it that we, during the year, we make a maitzi? Hooray, it's a cracker. It's just a very big cracker. Why doesn't that fall into the qualification of the Shulchan Aruch? That's something that's crackery, you don't make on a maitzi. So what are you going to have to answer? You're going to have to say, yeah, but let's say I have a zak cracker that, let's say you have a zak cracker that people have pashal shudis, people have as a meal, people have amalaf malka, whatever. So then that it's not exeris akasiv the other direction too. Just like we said, it's not exeris akasiv that when you have flour, water, baked, looks like bread, seems to taste like bread, that might be a mezainis. It depends on, is it a type of a flour, water, baked product that I kaveh sud on? If it's a flour, water, baked product that I kaveh sud on, even if it's a cracker, that cracker is going to be called matzah, and the Ashkenazim say, you make on that hamaitzi. What are the Sephardim hold? You can hear it. Maybe the Sephardim hold, not like I'm saying, maybe the Sephardim hold, it's exeris akasiv. Chazal said no. Or you can hear that during the year, matzah is not something which is so commonly eaten. On Pesach, the Sephardim change their mind. Yeah, because that becomes the bread. Or you could say a svara that by the Ashkenazim, since it's bread 8 days a year, maybe that's enough. But Akalpanim, you're seeing over here that the ikar is flour, water, baked, and are you kaveh sud on it. I'll be matzia something, and if my eitzah works, so make sure that the proceeds come to my koilel. I don't know why I'll ask you a klotz kasha. Flour, water, in the shape of a matzah, Ashkenazim make a maitzi. I explained why. Abaisai, is that true? You can have something called a matzah cracker. What bracha you make on a matzah cracker? So the answer is anybody that looks at it gets confused. But I'll tell you the bracha. The bracha is mezainis. Why? Abaisai, it's made in the same factory. It's cut up. Instead of serving it as a piece this big, they serve it, they cut it at the end of the line. They cut it into 3 pieces, 4 pieces, 9 pieces, whatever it is. So Abaisai, what's going on here? It's flour, water, it's exactly. The Torah is very simple. Since that was the process, and it was oimid to be made into matzah crackers, and matzah crackers are not something that people make a kviyas sud on. Nobody brings out the matzah crackers to make the shal shidduchos on them. So therefore, you're right, flour, water, but it turns back into a cracker. Now, I'm going to be matzia something, and remember where the proceeds go. Rabbi say, why doesn't somebody come up with making matzah crackers on Pesach? It's a great eitzah. You'll have mezainis. You won't have to wash every single time. So why didn't somebody?
What exactly? Could Rav repeat this? What exactly turns a matzah into a matzah cracker? The das of the machine.
The fact that milechatchila, that was the process it was oimid for. Unbelievable thing, huh? Unbelievable thing. That's how they serve it. That's how they sell it to the Welt. In other words, if I would take in my house matzahs, crack them up into a few pieces, then that would be called matzah because it already was called on it the shame of matzah. I'm going to need another one, please. No, thank you so much. It's already chal on it the shame matzah. So therefore, what's the bracha on matzah? Even if you have one dot, hamaitzi. But since it was oimid to be made into something that people are not kaveh suda on, so therefore it's going to be a mezainis. It's unbelievable chiddush. how this works with what we learned in the weeks before, Rabbeinu Tam. This doesn't necessarily work with Rabbeinu Tam, because according to Rabbeinu Tam, once there was a dough, we don't care what happens in the end. I don't care what your das was. So this doesn't necessarily work. But Al Kapanim can be the other svaras that we saw. When you take a dough and your final product is something that people are kaveh sud on, so that's going to be a moitzi. Now, again, so why don't they just do this on Pesach? For some reason, they're selling matzah crackers during the year. Let them sell them also on Pesach. It's interesting, Shaila. I have no idea why not.
Why? Because maybe on Pesach, any matzah by definition requires, as the Rav said earlier, somehow magically
that's the svara of Rosh Shlomo Zalman on Trunkinen. But you should know that's a very big chiddush. Kipshutai, if I were to make, I don't fully understand Rosh Shlomo Zalman. If I were to go and make something and say, Mefurish, the purpose of this is for my Cholamoy trip, and that's why people are buying it. So then why, because it has a Shem Matzah on Pesach, why should that be a reason that therefore you're kaveh sud on it? Why?
Are you yaitse at the Seder with that?
I'd be yaitse if I had. It'll come out an unbelievable chiddush. It'll come out that let's say he has, 3 matzah crackers, 4 matzah crackers, the size of a kazayas. Probably won't be yaitse. But if he has 20 of them, so then it'll be yaitse because it's a kfiyah suda.
Isn't the Seder itself a kfiyah suda? You bring in crackers made out of matzah to the Seder.
But that'll be that you can ask that anytime. That'll come out. Nobody's going to say that I bring in 4 crackers into the sukkah and then I make a leishiv. Well, I shouldn't say it like that. That's a machlekes. But the point is that not every time I have crackers does it turn it into a suda. As you know, a lot of people have crackers for lunch and it's not a suda. We'll have to learn exactly when, all that stuff, as Hashem. But Al Kapanim, this Rabbi Isai is a very big makor to the soft pretzel minig in America, which is something that doesn't exist here. I don't mean the minig, I mean the soft pretzels. They once sold soft pretzels here. And, I got all excited. It took me back to my youth. And then when it actually came Lamaisa, I was holding by take me back to the ball game. Verstehst? It wasn't exact. It was basically a piece of challah that they shaped in the shape of a pretzel. Rachman al-Itzlan. But Akapanim, Lamaisa, it'll come out.
So what's the mascot on crackers? What's the mascot on crackers?
On a matzah cracker, you make a mezainis. Make a mezainis. If there's any entrepreneur here, you heard it here first. Make them on Pesach. Isn't they? We'll make mezainis. All the HBrachos people have what to make kiddush on. I don't know,
And it wouldn't work to take a matzah and crack it into 4 pieces.
No, because then it was already chal on it, the shame bread. Once it's chal the shame bread, that's it. Even one dot is hamaitzi, like we learned in Sif Yud. Sif Tes, Sif Yud. Clear? Clear?
Clear, yeah. So far, clear, yeah.
The Gabi Chala, that's not a question. I mean, it's a question, but the answer is simple. The answer is that always you have to take challah on crackers and pretzels, and they always have to figure out a way, because all pretzels, crackers, all these things, of course, need to have challah taken from them. So they'll figure out a way. However they normally do it, they'll do it now. Now, the Maisa, the Fides, it could be this is why the minig in England, there's a lot of people on these bridge rolls, they make on them a mezainis. Kach is the minig item. Now, I must tell you, the emes here is that this is all the way Rosh Shlomo Zalman learned the sugya. Anyone who reads here the Mishnah Berurah and the Bir Halacha, excuse me.
Could the Rav give us the site to Rosh Shlomo Zalman? Do we have that in our HaRav?
Yeah, I don't think I gave it, but it was Shmir Shabbos, Perik Nun Daled Ha'ara Kuf Lamed Aleph.
Do you guys hear that? I'd like to put it up. Should we put it up now, or should we do it for later?
No, do it later, because I should have said it before, but that was the one I was talking about the whole time.
That's the only place where Shabbos Zalman discusses this is in a HaRav Shmir Shabbos.
Yeah.
Because it's a tremendous chiddush.
Yeah. I mean, he's discussing Trukinin. He's not discussing matzah so much, but he's discussing Trukinin. But if you read here the Mishnah Berurah and the Bir Halacha, you'll see that the Mishnah Berurah and the Bir Halacha are being tareach and having a very, very difficult time with a very important question, a question that you might have heard. the question they're bothered by is why in the world isn't this pas gomer, and why isn't this a berachos hamazon? Hooray, it's flour, it's water, nothing else. Now I just answered that question, Rabbi Isai. I just answered the shaila. It's because it's a bread, mamish, but it's a type of bread that you're not kaveh sudan, which we call in English a bridge roll, or we call in English a soft pretzel. But the Mishnah Berurah over here is going he has a very difficult problem. The Bialacha, the Mishnah Berurah, you'll see. I'm not going to read it. The Olim should see it themselves. He's got a big problem over here. He says, what's going on here? Why is it that this Trukinin doesn't understand it? He says, why is it? It's very difficult. I'll read you the marshal. He says, why should it be a I simply Laraka may oid, Lahachi it's a mezainis. The Eli I said bli laraka.
Peiches.
Halay I see dalid bli laraka. Kol shabas saif. It's a mighty. I am bialacha. The bialacha is mamish. Well, Matat over here doesn't know what to do. He says, "What's going on over here?" Isa shenefa bakarka. So he's dealing with it. Hoil ain't love to his pass. Hooray, the ikar tam ain't love to his pass. The Mishnah Berurah and the bialacha are clearly not learning like the Goyim Shleim Zalman. The Mishnah Berurah and the bialacha are clearly learning that this thing, this trukinin, is some weird looking thing, and it's something different, and therefore it's a game changer. Then there's no makor anymore that if you'd have some flour, water, bridge roll, etc., these things that you would make on it anything less than a moitzi. They're learning trukinin is some different looking thing, and then he's very disturbed though, because he says, what's going on? If it doesn't have a tzirisa de nahama, so then just like lakshin, once you're kaveh suda on it, it doesn't help. It remains in alamichya. So what happened over here? He says, and this is the Mishnah Berurah blight tarchim basically. But my point is that the Mishnah Berurah obviously did not learn like Rosh Shlomo Zalman. Rosh Shlomo Zalman is learning that this thing looks like bread, tastes like bread. It's just a type of bread you're not kaveh suda. From that, we have a chiddush of a bridge roll, and from that, we have a chiddush of a soft hot pretzel. The Mishnah Berurah so desperately did not know what is this case. He didn't even fathom the side of the Mishnah of Rav Shlomo Zalman. And he so doesn't know what the case is, he has to say it doesn't have a tzuras pass. But he says if it doesn't have a tzuras pass, so then how could it ever turn into a berachos hamazon? Mishnah Berurah doesn't know what to do with himself here. He blives tarchim. But one thing is clear, you would see from this Mishnah Berurah that it's not enough flour, water, and am I kaveh suda or not? No, Chazal gave t'nayim, and if you fit into those t'nayim, then good. If not, not. What were the t'nayim? Mixed, filled dough or a cracker type taste, etc. According to Mishnah Berurah, I don't know. A soft pretzel, it come out according to Mishnah Berurah is a moitzi. It come out according to Mishnah Berurah, bridge roll is a moitzi. What's halacha l'maisa? I don't know. What's halacha when you have, I guess, a suffix moitzi and suffix mezainis? Try to pater. If you can't pater, mistama b'diavad will tell you to make a mezainis and an alamichya. That goes with the klalim that we'll learn one day in Pasuk Bavkisnin. But upon him, that's a Baisai, at least the Gdam over here, Steve Tezvav. That has nothing to do, Rabbi Isai, with a matzah cracker. That everyone can agree is a mezainis. And that everyone agrees that Lefi the Ashkenazim, it'll be hamoitzi. Because it's a bread that you're kaveh sudan, that everyone can agree. If you have a type of bread that you are kaveh sudan, for sure it's a moitzi. If you don't, it falls back into the regular category of a regular cracker. Okay, then, and with all this, we're going to somehow get to wraps. Then Shulchan Aruch continues. Now we know what trukinin is. Then says the Shulchan Aruch, or we don't know what trukinin is. Then says the Shulchan Aruch, Teresa, Dahainu. So a moment. Then says the Shulchan Aruch, Teresa, Dahainu shaloikrin kemach umayim. What's this thing? This thing seems to be a flour, water, which is extremely porous, and then you cook it in this pit or something. But it's like, if you're not confused by now, I certainly am. What is this? What's this Teresa? What's this? A Teresa, for example, the Shulchan Aruch says, if you're kaveh suda on it, it doesn't help. It remains a bariman and mezainis forever. So what is this? I have something which is flour.
What's so complicated, quite a Rav? It's batter that's poured out of a frying pan. What's so complicated?
Yes, it's batter that's poured in a frying pan. And what
or a griddle.
Or grill. Okay, so now I'll ask you a question. let's say you make pancakes, right?
Make what?
These are pancakes and they're not pancakes.
I missed that word. What is you make what? Oh,
Pancakes.
pancakes. So it's nispashet and it's blilosai daka. So it should be minimizynus. What's the problem?
Yeah, is it a belila? It's a belila raka ma'oid, right? It starts out raka, and then it gets isa yachta, then it becomes together. So this is a pancake, correct? So it's very simple. It's a pancake.
Or a blitz or a waffle, right?
Oh, so the Maisa, I don't know. Over here it says, he writes, Ayin Magen Avram, when he talks about Trukanin, he says, Blila Raka Ma'oid. Okay, so Blila Raka Ma'oid, we said a second ago, is a Mezainis and Al Mechya, and it can turn into a Birch Samazin. This one is a Blila Raka. He doesn't even say the word Ma'oid, and this one can't turn into a Birch Samazin. What's going on here? What's the difference between Trukanin and so Lafir Shlam Mazamin? It's good. But if you learn like the Mishabura, what is this thing? What's this thing? Now it's a good gasha?
Right. The bigger problem is the end of that peches, because he's sending you to your dalid that you can have a raka that at the end of if you bake it, you got a mitzi. So it turns into a mitzi. A raka turns into a mitzi.
A raka turns into a mitzi. How come this raka doesn't turn into a mitzi? And what's the difference between it and Trukanin? What's going on here?
Because it's nispash, because the key word is nispashet. Isn't that the key word?
Nispashet. Well, every time you pour something, it's going to be nispashet. So what's the difference? The difference is if I'm holding it in.
Could be. If you put it into a pan and it becomes a square, maybe that becomes a tire lechem. No.
So you look in the Mishabura, and Sivkatin Lamet Ches. He sheds a little bit of light over here. The Mishabura over here is going on a Shulchan Aruch and Siv Ches.
Go back, guys. Lamet Ches. Go back. Let's find it.
Lachmaniot. What are lachmaniot? So Ben Yehuda thought they were rolls, but he is not exactly the kaveya of the taich in halacha. And the Shulchan Aruch says it's a blila ava, lechem gomer, you make a mitzi birch zamazin. But sometimes you can make a lachmaniyah with a blila raka. With a thin
181. There we go.
You sometimes can make it with a thin batter, and it's called niblis, and you make a mezainis and an alamechya, but if you're kaveh suda, you make a mitzi birch zamazin. Now, what's going on? This is trick. I could lose my mind here. So, Mishabura says like this. Mishabura says in Sivkatin, Lamid, Zayin, and Ches, he says, look, this is some of them are, you pour them, and they get very, very thin, and they're very, very loose. He says, if they're, now I'm just going to paraphrase, and then I'll show you inside the Mishabura. But it seems to me that there are 3 levels over here, and that's what's going on. It seems to me there's a level where it's a loose batter, and it doesn't become very thin. It's not so thin. And that one, you should know, that one, it could even be a mitzi. If when you bake it, that's what we learned already. We learned already when you have a loose batter. That was in Sif, excuse me, Sif Yud, sorry? Sif Yud Davar Shebli Lasei Raka, and you bake it in an oven, it's a mitzi. So it seems to be, Blila Raka is not the reason for something to be not be a mitzi, because we see in your dalid you can have a blila raka, which is a mitzi. 1, blila ava is also not a reason to necessarily be a mitzi, because we know all over your gimel we saw if you cook it in the end it might not be a mitzi. Okay, over here now I'm going to break you down the 3 rules, and with this everything will be miyushiv. There's going to be a blila raka, which is like your dalid. That's in the lashon of the Mishabura. That's something which is, even though it's a blila raka, but it's going to come out kanira thicker and bread-like, and that's going to be a birch zamazin and a mitzi. Then the Mishabura has something which is dakim virakim. His lashon is dakim. It's einam dakim virakim kol kach. It's not, the result is not so thin, and it's not so soft. You know what that's like, Rabbi Say? That's like a pita bread. A pita bread is a moitzi. It's something that the result, even if it started out a liquid batter, but the result is not going to be so, it won't be so flimsy. Your result won't be so flimsy. Okay. Then the Mishabura goes on. He says there's another darga, which is dakim v'rakim b'yoiser. Very, very dakim and very, very rakim. That's called lachmani yois. And that's possible b'kisnin. Then the Mishabura Sivkat Lameches and Sharet Sian Sif Kotin Lamed Vav says that there's something called, he says it's mamish dakim v'klushim harbe yoiser. It's like the most thin and the most, the most flimsy exposed. This is something, this is what the Mishabura calls these, I don't know, these waffle texts. This thing is dakim uklushim yoiser. There's 3 levels. There's something which is dakim and rachem, not so much. Then there's a middle, and then there's something which is legamre thin. Now, to explain this, Rabbi Say,
what's the site in the Sharetzian again? Quite around.
Sharetzian, it's right by the Sharetzian Sivkat and Lamed Vav. Eisen Shekairin. They pour and they keep on spreading and spreading and spreading because they are so thin. It's such a loose batter, it just keeps on spreading.
So wouldn't that be like a blintz cover or
maybe?
A thin
You know what the best example of this is? I don't know if you've Doilam knows in Eretz Yisrael they sell these wafers. They sell wafers, and they're called vafelim by the kids, right? Little wafers, regular wafers. What they are is layers and layers of very, very thin dough chocolate, thin dough chocolate. And at one, it looks like one big thing. You know what? Hold on. Maybe I'll make it show and tell.
Is this the Sharetzian here? It's called dak. That's the last line here, because they're made in 2 barzilim. That's what the Rav is referring to. It says v'shayfchen naisa b'fushel barzel shekayir purban whatever. What's the modern equivalent to that?
No, I don't have wafer. Sorry, but what a wafer is in Eretz Yisrael.
I'm going back to the Sharetzian. Sharetzian says there's 2 barzilim here. There's
what they do is they take 2 pieces of metal and they make it extremely tight together and they put through this thing. And in essence, that's really what they do with the wafers. They take a very thin batter, it pours, it's extremely thin, and you get a tiny thin thing that if it would be by itself, it came out cracks all the time. They put them together.
America, they call that waffles, quite a Rav.
No. I know what waffles are. No. There's not waffles. Waffles is very thick. There's not waffles. No. I'm talking about wafers. They take wafers. It's made of very thin sheets of dough, whatever. They pour it, and it heats it up and makes a very, very thin cracker-like thing. Then they put another one there, then chocolate, and then they cut them up, and you have a little small wafer, little cookies. Paper thin, thank you. It's paper thin. It's absolutely not a waffle. A waffle is not like that at all. A waffle you pour, and it turns into a very thick thing. As a matter of fact, it's a very big shiloh. Why in a waffle you wouldn't make a mitzi? All right, it becomes thin. It becomes very, very thick together, and it's a very bready type of substance.
The Rav's wafers hard or are they soft?
Sorry?
Are the Rav's wafers hard?
No, so after they dry them, so they become very hard afterward.
They become hard.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is Raka and Raka. So what's the
so again, you have 3 levels now. You have something which is extremely thin and pory. The result is extremely thin. They used to have these.
Had a chance to become a mitzi. Why should we have to finish that? It's a mezainis.
This thing could never become a mitzi because that's not tzurisa de hama. When something is so incredibly thin, for example, in the middle of a meal, if a person has a wafer, he has to make a mezainis. It's just like having a bisli. It's something that can never turn into bread. So if you eat 32,000 wafers, after you get out of the hospital, you make alamichya. Now, for example, For example, this would answer our problem. For example, some blintzes, I can't take responsibility on all blintzes, but some blintzes, you pour them the batter, it's a very thin batter, and you get a very thin result. So that's a mezainis that can never turn into an alamichya. Rav Elyashiv, when I showed him a blinza, Rav Elyashiv, the one I showed him, he said, that's not darga, that's not the third darga, the one that I showed him. He said, that's the second darga. It was thick enough that it's could be a mezainis and a lamichya. It could turn into a hamaitzi because it wasn't so thin. But this is together. For example, they have puffed pastry. What exactly is puffed pastry? You know, all the BRACHOS are made out of it and all of these things. What is puffed pastry? In essence, it's very, very thin layers of this type of a dough. And then they put in between them oil and who knows what, and then it bakes together and it becomes one. But there you could hear a svar, a falk, for example. The falk held that it doesn't matter that afterward it bakes together. We have to look that each one is in essence separate, and therefore he held it's a mezainis that can never turn into a berachos hamazon. If you don't go like Rafalk and you say no, because it comes together, it bakes together. It could be if you have a huge bareka, that's a meal type food, that would go into the shaila pizza perhaps. But I'm just giving the oilam a shaila that they should be able to realize now that when you're dealing with something so incredibly thin, now there's room to talk about that no longer is a Teresa Dinaham. And the Fida Mishabrua, that's the chilik between Trukanin and Teresa. Teresa is something which is so thin. The result of that Belila Raka, the result is something so thin that therefore it can never get, that's not a Tsurisa de Nahama. It doesn't look like bread. And therefore, if you eat the millions of them, you don't need to take challah, and it can't be mechayev berachos hamazon. Mashen kain truknin. Truknin is something that it depends if you're kaveh suda. According to Mishabura, it's going to be dependent, I guess. Thick, thin, it's not going to be as thin, it's not going to be so thick. Those are the Gedarim. Lefi this Rabbi Isai, a lafa in Eretz Yisrael, you all know the lafas that they sell, the shawarmas. So those things are very thick. And a pita is very thick. And therefore you make a moitzi and a berachos hamazon and a wafer, like I explained, which is paper thin, just a bunch of paper thin together. So those you make a mezainis even in the middle of a meal, because it's not like the regular cake shaila in the middle of a meal, because it's something that could never turn into a piece of bread. Now the big shaila is, what's the din of a wrap? So now we all saw a wrap. So maybe one could say, listen, the wrap is very, very thin, and therefore it's a mezainis and alamichya. And even if you eat a whole meal and whatnot, but it's like a teresa. But the problem is, Rabbi Isai, there's a very big chilik between a wrap and what we've been discussing with a teresa, because a teresa, Rabbi Isai, till now, we were talking about something that the batter was a liquid batter, and the result is something paper thin. So then at what point did it get the shame bread? Originally, it didn't have a shame bread because that's sufkanin. It's a very liquidy batter. But soif, it also, thank you. Do we have the wraps? Bring the wrap, thank you. Thank you so much. But soif, it's a liquidy batter. But soif, after you bake it, it bakes into this paper thin thing. So therefore, it can never become bread. It never was bread. It never became bread. Mash and Kane, how do they make a wrap? They take the dough, they bat it down to what you're seeing over here. Thank you. They bat it down, but it started out a belila ava. We never saw that something that starts out a belila ava could now lose the shame pas. It's true. Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Yoina had a machlekes about something that you cooked in the end. Is that going to be maybe the same machlekes? So then fine. So then a wrap you should at least have to eat in the middle of a meal. It should at least be the same machlekes, Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbeinu Yoina. A thick dough that you started out thick, and then in the end, you made it so thin, that's like in the end, you went and cooked it. You took away the shame surisa de nahama. So that'll be telling Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbeinu Yoina. But more so, who knows? Maybe you can hear that when is it that Teresa, things like Teresa don't get the shame because you're dealing with a liquid batter. And beside, it's paper thin. So therefore, that's never going to be called bread. Mashenking this, hooray, it's dough. And it was battered down. And I use it as a meal type food. Everybody uses this as a bread supplement. So in what way is it not Teresa de Nahama? You're going to say it's as thin. Okay, maybe it's as thin. First of all, is it as thin? Hooray, this is what the Sephardi matzahs look like. So what makes it be so thin? Number one, the Sephardi matzah, which is their bread, is amoitzi. So, and it's elamai, you're going to say, no, but it shakes. That's not bread. Bread doesn't shake. Really? When the Gemara wants to describe koirech, how do you think they did koirech? My Sephardi neighbors tell me very simple, because the matzahs wrap around. To kricha is you wrap around. The bread back then, Rabbi Yisai, was like this. This is bread. And they would do kricha, and that's how my Sephardi neighbors do it. We do, a zeicher of the kricha, the Ashkenazim. We just make a sandwich. But a kricha is a krach, like you learn in Gemara, that it's something that goes around. So therefore, why is this not bread? If this isn't bread because it shakes and is flimsy, so then neither is alafa. Alafa also shakes. Elamai alafa is thicker, but you have to choose. What's the reason why it doesn't have its use in hammer? Because it shakes? Because it's flimsy? Why should that be a reason not to be bread? And it started out of dough, and it ended up something that people use as a main for the meal. So this is why the pash this is that you'll make on it hamoitzi elamai. But it says on the package mezainis. It's like we said before. If you go with the mezainis roll svara, so then yeah, okay. But we know that that's a toyus l'chayra, because when you have something that the velt is kaveh on, it's bread, water, started out of dough, and the velt is kaveh as a suda. So it's a birchas hamazon. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's very famous. David Feinstein, Zeichel Tag Levracha, was asked in a video, and he said it's bread. It's something that people eat as a bread, as a supplement. L'chayra, it's bread, and l'chayra the bracha should be a birchas hamazon. L'chayra, if that's true, then the only thing we'd have to ask is there any limitzchus? By Messiah Yisrael, I don't really have one. Is there any limitzchus over here? We tried to say the limitzchus is that it's like a trisa. Here, Abba Yisai, there is one thing that we could maybe potentially clear, and this I found in the Minchas Yitzchak in Chelik Aleph, Siman Ayin Aleph, Ois Vav. And Shnei Nevi'im Nisnabnu B'Nevua Echaz, also Rosh Shlomo Zalman in the Sefer V'Sein Bracha in Perek Chav Zayin, Ha'aretz Zayin. He said the same thing as the Minchas Yitzchak. They say that svara that I mentioned before, it seems to be, it might even be in Aruch HaShulchan. That svara which I mentioned before and I said is very shver. They go with Lamaisa. They say that the Iker is tali if you can make something super thin. I don't care if it originally was a blila ava. The Gemara, the Rishayim over here are talking about a blila raka because that was the Metzias. They didn't have kalim that can make things so extremely thin. But we that have kalim that can make things so extremely thin, he's talking over there about a tshuva about Raivita, all kinds of tshuva over there. It's an English food that no American knows, or what should I tell you, cares about. But akapanim, the Minchas Yitzchak is mala atzad, that if something is super thin takes away the shame Teresa the Nahama. And he says maybe that's the pshat in Teresa, not like I said, that it's because of both. Number one, it pours. Number two, it's your result is not a Teresa the Nahama. He says it's all totally in one thing. Is it super thin? If it's super thin, not a Teresa the Nahama. Now, by side, I find that to be a very big chiddush, simply because he says that they didn't have the ability to do that back then. Why did they not have the ability? Did anybody here ever work in a matzah bakery? Why not? You just take it and keep on going and keep on rolling. What's the pshat that they didn't have the ability? Of course they had the ability. Is this thing any thinner than a matzah? What's the difference between this and a matzah? This is what a Sephardi matzah looks like. So why is this thin enough? And I'll tell you more than that, Rabbi said. This thing is 10 times the size of the paper thin wafers that I described. They take 10 layers of those wafers in order to make a wafer. This thing, you can fit 3 paper thin layers inside this wrap. So why is this considered so thin? If it would be thinner, maybe, I don't know. But now that it's the way it is, So then you see that they could have done this. So I don't see why this thing should not be hamaitzi. And it should be
How much? What's the exact number? HaRav? Giving our devareinu l'shiurin, a waffle or a thing is 0.1 millimeter, and
a malasot. The Lashon of the Shulchan Aruch also did that. The Mishabura said dakim v'klushim harbe yoiser. All these a malasot. I guess it has to be just to feel that kanira. The pshat is like this: when they're paper thin, right? They used to have these crackers. I forgot what they're called. Something thins. Bread thins, maybe. Sounds like very paper thin. Right. So then I can hear something like that is going to be annoying to eat. So therefore it won't be a bread. Mashenkin this, which is totally not annoying to eat. It's something that people eat as a food supplement, as a bread supplement. Why in the world wouldn't you make on it a brachos mazon and a maitzi? As they come to us. Others tell me, nah, because you can't eat it by itself. I don't know. You see people eating them, and after they finish the chicken in it, there's a little bit left. They eat them. Some say because there's no taste. And then they want to say it's like those shilas, where you have a mezainis with no taste and it's tuffle. And yeah. Some say it's just like a bag. You need it to hold the food together. It means those people don't eat wraps, everybody say. But the people that eat wraps, they disagree with you. They like the taste. And enochanami, maybe they like the taste of the bread to get enochanami. There's a lot of people that don't eat bread plain. So they don't eat bread plain, they don't eat these plain. So therefore, kipshutai, one that learns a sugya is going to say it's a mezainis, is going to say it's a maitzi, and a brachos mazon, even on one bite. And if somebody does like that, you can't say he's doing the wrong thing. But Manasa, someone in my neighborhood, took one of these wraps before Rav Elyashiv was nifter. He took it to Rav Elyashiv. There's a video of him, and I'm sure the Olam heard about this video. And he took the thing, he waved it in front of Rav Elyashiv, and Rav Elyashiv went like this. It's not a tzrisa de nahama. Maybe the Ruach HaKodesh, Rav Elyashiv, the Melech of Klal Yisrael. That's certainly enough to scare Rabbi Kallus off of everything I said during this shir. Aini Maven, I'm makim mekaymi. I don't understand it, and therefore, in my house, they pater it before they eat it, because I do think it's a maitzi. But the Melech of all Beis Yisrael said that it's a mezainis, and he saw it. And he said it's not a tzrisa de nahama, and if it's not a tzrisa de nahama, that means that it's a mezainis and an al-micha, even if you eat 50 of them. I do not understand it. I tried very hard today to say both stadim. How is it different than a matzah? How is it different than at least it should be the shaila of Rabbeinu Tam and Rabbeinu Yaina that you should have to eat it during a meal? It started out a thick dough. So no matter what, it should at least be something. It's Elamai, you'll say, no, this is even worse because it's so thin and so flimsy. But is it so thin? Is it so flimsy? So therefore, I do not understand it, but I'm makir mekoimi. And therefore, you heard me tell my daughter to make a moitzi on something else and to pater, because l'chayra, it is a very shver shaila. L'chayra. Before I finish, is there any other shailas everybody say on what we just said?
Yeah. You're asking us for shilas? There are many shilas here. I mean, we can combine two of your shilas, which you can put schnitzel into a wrap. They have. Then we have two shiurim for the price of one. So just as for a point of information, other people claim that subsequently Rav Elyashiv was revisited on this issue, and Rav Elyashiv was not so much chayzer, but it wasn't the same psak that it was ein b'tar lechem. It's pasha that it was. Other people claim to have counter videos to this.
The question that bothers me the most is that even if you say it's tzrisa de nahama, how can it be any less than the shaila of Rabbeinu Tam, which we're anyways hold that your shemayim only eats it in a suda? I don't know how you can get out of that shaila. But later. I want to mention one thing which is unrelated.
I'm sure many other Gedal Yisrael were consulted on the wrap thing, and many of them said at least a suffix. At least a suffix. I heard from this. I heard from Rav Nissen himself. I asked Rav Nissen, and I asked other people, and they told me it's at least a suffix. So Rav Elyashiv was not taken this positively across all of Klal Yisrael. So.
I tell my daughter, Pater, like you heard. I want to mention two things. One is, first of all, the next year probably will be on Daf Lamed Ches, right? Already Trima, probably, no?
We're ready preparing Passover Kistin, but however wants to.
No. So we're jumping to Pasuk Bekisnin?
No, we're not jumping. We're easing. So if Rob wants to do Trima, please do. I mean,
No, because it's a whole different sugya. I'll do Pasuk Bekisnin then. We'll go back to Vav Zayin Ches. But then that means jumping
we're
Gemara.
going back to Vav. We'd like to start Vav Zayin Ches because otherwise we're stuck here forever. I mean,
No. So I'm saying we're not going to do an order of the Masechta though. That's all I'm saying. That means we're jumping to Mem Aleph.
No, we're not. We're starting it here and bringing Mem Aleph into the sugya here because the feeling is to do all of Lechem together.
So then practically, I should be doing Vav Zayin Ches in the next year, but whatever, Vav or something like that.
I think so. Unless you feel that there's a very important shir that you need to devote to Trima, we'll do that.
No. Trima is a new sugya. It's totally new. It's definitely totally new sugya. It's Paris. I just meant if we're going, I'll say to the Shulchan Aruch.
No, we're going to do Pasuk Bekisnin.
Pasuk Bekisnin. Okay. And one more thing, I wasn't clear. Reb Shlomo, you want me to send my Mekoimis on the Shir for Agudah for the Yerushalayim?
Yes.
That's what it was. I didn't understand what it was. Okay.
Can we talk about this? Can we talk about this offline? Can I ask the Rav call me and discuss it? Okay.
Yeah, sure. One more thing is I want to just mention about grape nuts. Somebody described to me this week how they make grape nuts. I don't know anything about the cereal. I don't know if it has an extra, doesn't. I don't know. But he described to me grape nuts. And it's unbelievable, the Alma de Shikr that we live in. But it's very related to what we spoke about in last week's shir. A grape nut is they take a dough, which is a thick dough, and they bake this thick dough into an oifen, which is inedible. At that point, if you would bite it, you break your teeth. Then they take, a hammer, smash it into 1,000 grape nuts. That is clearly a mezainis, because all the mid-processed svaras that we spoke about last week, let's say croutons and flatbread and all these things, there it was a bread in the middle. So that's a shaila. Do we look at it how they're going to sell it to us, or do we look in the middle? It was an edible bread. But a grape nut was something that it's this massive thing that is totally inedible, and it only becomes edible but safe. So that's just a regular shaila of a pretzel. So this is Rabbi Yisrael Mitzvah Shem. We'll continue next time with the great sugya Pasuk Bekisnin and Sivav Mitzvah Shem.
Okay, one last question. Could you put that picture of that trivia up? Because we saw this lashon in the Paiskim, we didn't know what it was. And then we found it was in the L'shain of the Loyazim. Are you still there, Pesach? Can you put that trivia up, or have you gone? That picture that you showed, I would like to ask her of what that possibly could be. In the Loyazim, we saw the word trivia. And where is it?
Ravita.
What is it?
Sure, this is what the Minchas Yitzchak was talking about.
Yeah.
Ravita crackers.
These are the crackers that he was talking about, right?
Yeah.
And it actually has the name Ravita.
Yeah, Ravita. My Shreya's favorite.
Okay. So I guess I saw it in England. Yeshukayach. So next week the Rav will give us an introduction to Siv Vav.
That's
right?
Hashem.
Yes. Okay.
That's
Yeshukayach. And if I can communicate with you, I would appreciate it. Thank you very much. We're short one, Rabbi Sai. So, no, we're not short one. Ash, we have 10 exactly. If everybody sticks around. Are you leaving?